This Day Live, the Sunday talk show here on the Arise News channel. Now to our next subject of the day, which is about inflation and also fuel tax and developments in the economic sector, business and economic sector. And my guest is High Chief Johnson Chukwu, Double Chief Johnson Chukwu, Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer of Cowrie Asset Management Limited, who is an economist and a financial analyst. He now joins me to look at a number of economic issues in the course of the week. Now, High Chief, let's start with the data released on Monday by the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics, saying that inflation has gone down by about 1.6% year on year. It's now 21.88%, descending from a year ago, 32.85%. And this is fifth consecutive month of disinflation. Now, some people are jubilating. Some people are saying, well, if you look at the details, urban inflation has gone down. Rural inflation is still very high. Food inflation, they may say, has appreciated, but if you look at the details, food inflation is still high in Borno, food inflation is still high in Kano, and that comparatively, the cost of living has not really gone down. So what is there to jubilate? Because concerned citizens are saying, we don't see this in the market. What we see is figures. However, the central bank and other economists are saying that, look, from their observation, if this disinflation continues, it's a clear evidence that the economy is doing very well. Is this economy doing well?
Thank you, Your Excellency. Once again, it's always my pleasure to speak with you on this your program, on This Day Live. Looking at the inflation figure, just some housekeeping. The figure for August was 20.12%. It was July that was 21.88%. Okay. So we saw a further drop from 21.88% to 20.12% in August. When people say they don't feel it, I can relate with why they are saying that. The truth is that it is a positive thing that the inflation figure had dropped from about 24.5% or 24.45% in January this year to about 20.12%. And we need to sustain that downward trajectory, which is disinflation, not deflation, disinflation, because we're seeing the increase in price levels at a lower pace than they were at the previous period. But clearly, why households can't feel it is that the household begin to feel disinflation when their household income is increasing or has increased above the rate at which price levels are increasing. Household income have not increased this year. I mean, substantially, most households have not had an increase of about 20% in their average household income. But bear in mind that in the past 1 year, 1.5 years, or call it between January 2024 and now, that actually price levels have increased by about 53.3%. Because bear in mind that after we rebase the GDP, the inflation rate calculation, we now use last year's average, which was 33.18%, as a base for inflation, computing subsequent monthly and annual inflation. So if you consider that average, you're building from a base of about 33.18%, and you had an increase of about 20.12%, it then means cumulatively, over the past, from January last year till August this year, average price levels have increased by about 53.3%. But what hurts most households is food inflation, because an average household's consumption, household consumption mostly skewed in favor of food and food-related items. The average food inflation for 2024 was 39.1%. Food inflation for August was 21.87%. So if you sum up those two, you have an average food inflation over the past 1 year, 8 months, of about 61%. So it then means an average household should have had an increase in their household income by about 61% for them to remain where they were in January last year. Do you understand what I'm saying? So how many households have had an increase of up to 61% in their household income? So if you have not had that kind of increase in your household income, then you are likely going to not going to feel the impact of the deceleration in inflation rates. So you are still suffering, okay, you still can't afford what you used to afford by December 2023.
Okay,
you still can't afford that.
What some analysts say is that this inflation that we're talking about may take a while. And the prediction is that, in fact, the figures may even go further down. One report was saying we could even reach about 17% by December 2025. However, some of the factors they say is responsible for this, persistent disinflation is stable exchange rate, benchmark rate at 27.5%, which means that there is a slowing of credit demands. And don't forget also the 20.12% that you talk about. Could it be because we're in the harvest season? So you see moderation in food prices, even if food inflation is still persistent in many parts of the country. Now, if these factors that have been identified by the analysts are true, what is the guarantee that they could be sustained? Because it is only when they are sustained that you will have this, a persistent rate.
Well, in economics, there's never a guarantee that any particular trend will be sustained.
Okay, but on the one hand, on the other hand.
Yes, but what we look at, what are those factors that could reverse the current declining inflation rate or deceleration in inflation rate? And I think those factors are not very pronounced. Yes, you could see when we go into the planting season that the level of food available may reduce. So you could see a reversal of the decline we've seen in food inflation. But even at that, I do not think that we're going to see, because bear in mind that the government has also allowed for importation of some food items, including rice, that were sometimes restricted. And the time when we banned importation of rice, when we began to see spike in food inflation. So then, in terms of exchange rate stability, we've seen Naira trade below even 1,500 Naira to $1. And yes, that may not be sustained forever. But even if you're going to see a reversal, it's not going to be very drastic. I don't see Naira going back to 1,800, 1,900 Naira to $1. So even if you have a shift in exchange rate or a decline, a depreciation of Naira, it's not going to be very drastic. So I think when it comes to core inflation, I do not foresee in the immediate factor that could lead to a spike in core inflation. That is inflation excluding farm products and volatile energy inputs. Then in terms of energy costs, the energy costs, particularly fuel, has a direct relationship with exchange rate and international crude prices. It is expected that international crude prices are not likely going to increase because OPEC is increasing their crude production. And then, in terms of economic activity, we are seeing a slowdown in manufacturing activities in China. So if you combine those two, so you should expect that demand for crude is not going to be very strong, and therefore you don't expect a spike in crude price. So if you don't see that, then the concerns that energy costs will increase is also slow. So what are those factors that are volatile? Farm items, farm produce, and like I said, even if you see some level of increase in food prices, it's not going to be drastic. Yes, we're in the harvest season when all the food crops, most of them are produced or harvested. But even when you go beyond that, you're not going to see a material increase in food prices. Okay,
the Monetary Policy Committee is going to meet tomorrow. And some people are saying, okay, now that we have the scenario that you have described, it is about time now to reduce the benchmark rate from 27.5%. Maybe by about 50 basis points, some people are recommending. Well, that may be a bit high. But the expectation is that when the MPC meets tomorrow, Tuesday, and we hear, from them, from the members, that, we should expect some kind of reduction in the benchmark rate. And even the cash reserve ratio, which is currently 50%. It was fixed at 50% in July, the last meeting, that maybe, it should be taken down to 35%. What are your expectations? What do you recommend? What do you think is likely to happen?
Okay, let me start from what I recommend, which is also my expectation. is that the Monetary Policy Committee will reduce the benchmark interest rate from 27.5% to maybe 27%. It is, even if you reduce by 50 basis points, it's very symbolic because if you consider the fact that today, Treasury bills auctions, the last auction was the 364-day instrument was about 16.7%. So you do not even have money market instruments that give you returns that actually compensate for the, that are clear alternative to the cash reserve ratio, monetary policy rate. But most importantly, bear in mind that the pressures we had on inflation were not driven by excess credit expansion. And what are those factors that the Monetary Policy Committee will always consider in taking their decisions? One, they look at pressures on exchange rate. That pressure has reasonably abated over the past couple of months. They look at the core inflation rate. We've seen a consistent decline in inflation from about 24.5% in January to about 20.12%. But most importantly, at this point, the emphasis should be how do we improve productivity? How do we improve the capacity of the real sector of the economy to continue to produce and generate employment? And at that point, I think the Monetary Policy Committee, looking at what should be the most important factor in driving economic, in determining the economic focus of the government, should be to drive productivity, to drive employment. And to do that, you need to give the banks the incentive to lend. Because if you do not, the banks will comfortably rather have to keep their money with the central bank. Bear in mind that you have an asymmetric corridor plus 500 minus 100. So even if they keep their money with the central bank, they have the incentive to get 26.5%. So it makes sense to keep the money in a non-risk asset with the central bank than to lend it. And you can have strong economic growth, particularly in this sector, if lending rate remains at the range it is today, in the region of 30%.
Okay. Let's talk about customs. The customs levy, 5%, free on board, FOB, it is called. Now, the Minister of Finance has now directed that customs should suspend that. Meanwhile, it's a matter of law. The comprehensive insurance, CIS, they call it, which was suspended, the 7% surcharge on customs collection, which was suspended, and now the 5% FOB was introduced.
4%.
4%, rather. Okay. Also, it's that standard international practice. You either have a FOB, the opposite of it is CIT, cost insurance freight. And it's about the responsibilities of buyers and sellers, all that. Anyway, don't let me bore readers with international trade. Now, the federal government taking the decision that this should be suspended because Manufacturer Association of Nigeria complained, NECA complained that this would drive up inflation, this would be an additional burden on the consumers. Yeah, the decision that government has taken, is it just political expediency? Because if you look at the explanation and the practice elsewhere, it looks like, yes, it will bring revenue, but that's how it's done in other places in the world. So is this political expediency? No, government just trying to suck up to the business sector?
No, Dr. Ruben, I think it is more of economic consideration, and I'll tell you why. Today, the economy's growth rate at best was 3.3%, based on the base GDP growth rate. And this economy, Ghana is growing about 6.5%. That's our next door neighbors. This economy, ordinarily, to create the employment we need, needs to grow at close to 10%. Nigerian government has mounted that it wants to grow the economy to $1 trillion economy when we're about 240-something billion. So which is an impossible task. But we need to implement measures, policies that will ensure that that becomes a feasibility, even if it's going to be 30 years' time. If you continue to impose taxes on the real sector of the economy, you are going to slow down economic activities. You're going to slow down employment. You're going to slow down income. And you're going to slow down consumption. All these things is cycle in nature. And I tell you, when you talk of the issue of 4% surcharge on FOB, bear in mind that if you look at the last international foreign trade report, that Nigeria's importation of machinery and transport equipment accounted for about 28% of our imports. What that means is that you're going to impose this tax on those who need to bring in this equipment to manufacture. So you therefore increase their cost of setting up even their manufacturing activities or refurbishing their manufacturing activities. And this is a sector that is dying. The other 16%, about 2.4 trillion naira, that was imported was for chemicals and similar products. Those chemicals are likely going to be input material for manufacturing activities. You're going to put 4% on it, which will further increase the cost of their production. And that when you have that increase, it's going to be passed on to consumers. And Nigerian consumers are suffering from lack of ability to consume, which is why the lack of ShopRite is shutting down their mega stores. So you have to realize that if
they say they are retooling.
Yeah, they are shutting down the mega stores and they are retooling to smaller mom and pop shops, because they say that the economics of Nigeria today does not support mega shops, which is at variance with the concept of economies of scale. Because most households do not have income to go and make demands. So if you continue to impose taxes on input materials, machinery and equipment, on raw materials, you're going to make it more difficult for companies to produce and sell, and therefore that will discourage manufacturing in the country.
Isn't this a reminder of the sorry situation in which we have found ourselves as a grossly import-dependent economy, where there is very little productivity, because we're talking about imports?
Okay, one of the things I always say, look, there has to be a process of transition. You're not going to come from 0 to 100.
We have been at it for 65 years.
Yes, I'm coming.
Independence.
Today we don't have the industrial base to manufacture capital goods. That's equipment. You need to bring in those equipment. You need to import them first. Then when you start your production activities, you have technological transfer, you develop the competencies, you begin to manufacture those things. So if you shut out that process, you are going to remain where you are. We don't have the raw materials to even manufacture the basic things, even the little ones we manufacture. You have to bring those raw materials, and over time have ability to convert and produce your own raw materials. So it's not going to jump from 0 to 100. So you need to create a policy environment that will support the gestation of this industrial sector. Bear in mind that we used to have an industrial sector that has collapsed. So we must ensure, and let me tell you, Dr. Abati, one of the bans we have today is that in as much as government is growing revenue, we have not built the necessary policy environment to stimulate the real sector productive activities. If you do everything and the government generates the highest level of revenue, and we do not have an industrial-based economy, productive economy, we are going to remain where we are today. And the government should focus on what policies will drive productive activities. You are not going to use taxes to further constrain those productive activities. You are rather going to use taxes as incentive to stimulate the real sector productive activities.
Okay, talking about taxes, let's talk about fuel tax. Taiwo Yedele, the chairman of the Fiscal Policy and Tax Committee, says, well, this fuel tax, what government is just trying to do is to harmonize all the taxes under the tax law, the new tax law, and that it won't be implemented anyway until January. That's the one that is 5%. Now, what it means is that if you buy fuel or diesel, you are going to pay an additional 5% tax. The argument is that that fuel tax was in the FEMA Act, but that now is in the process of harmonization, is been accommodated under the new tax law. And the whole objective is about green energy and all of that. But do you think fossil fuel can be phased out? Do you think we're close in terms of our projections to phasing out fossil fuels? Because again, your original argument that if you tax, you put more burden on the people, and the people are kicking.
Yes, I think the government also, I think Taiwo Yedele has said that, and also the Minister of Finance also have said that this fuel surcharge is not going to be effective from January. It's in the Act, but it's not going to be implemented immediately. And the Minister of Finance said he has to give, the implementation of a new tax requires a directive from the minister, and he had not issued that. But we have to look at, I always say, when you look at economic policies, you have to look at every economic policy has a positive and negative. So you have to make sure that the positive outweigh the negative. And you have to look at where you are in your economic development. The concept of tax as a source of government revenue is very important. But you also have to make sure that there is capital accumulation. That if you continue to deprive your citizens of what you call net income, or what they call residual income after they have spent their immediate expenses, then they're not going to be able to build capital. If they don't build capital, you're not going to have a fast growth in your economy because there's no
There will be no demand.
Yeah, there's no demand, there's no capital to invest. So when we're coming from an era where on May 29th, 2023, the president said that subsidy is gone. What that means is that citizens that were enjoying negative tax began to suffer positive taxation. When I mean positive taxation, because subsidy is negative tax. Because government is giving you. So so that automatically becomes a tax on their income, the increase in fuel. Then when you further increase that by government also taking from them, it becomes double jeopardy. I do not object to issue of fuel surcharge, but I think it's too early. The government should allow the household income to recover at the point when they have disposable income that will allow them pay more taxes. But finally, on the comment whether we're going to phase out fossil fuel consumption and then we're going to have electric energy, I think it will be a long time to come.
It may take the next 50 years. Anyway, thank you very much, Chief Johnson Chukwu, for joining us on This Day Live, this Sunday talk show.